All right, so another big trade that went down this deadline that I have not discussed at all yet on this channel is Brandon Ingram to the Toronto Raptors for Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. The first-round pick, by the way, I did have to look into this to confirm, but the first-round pick is the 2026 Pacers pick, which is top 4 protected. Almost certainly will convey either in the late teens or early 20s if I had to guess. And then the second-round pick is a 2031 second, I believe, the Raptors pick. So not super painful picks. That first round pick is going to be, again, we're probably a pick in the early 20s. So not a terrible pick, in my opinion, to give up by any means. And overall, I think a pretty decent value for Brandon Ingram. Look, Brandon Ingram is a player who I think is honestly a little bit underappreciated overall. His trade value is definitely lower than you would think it would be for a player who's had the type of career that he's had and has had a pretty decent year. Now, he's out basically indefinitely with a high ankle sprain. Shout out Lou Dort for that one. Dort has a habit, it seems like, of getting players injured. Say what you will. But he's probably not going to impact this Raptors team this season. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play at all. I think it's possible he does, but I would not be surprised at all if we literally do not see Brandon Ingram the rest of this season for the Raptors. This is not a this season move, and I think the point here is actually that it might get them a little bit worse this season. Now, it doesn't get them significantly worse, but they weren't going to get significantly worse without trading young assets and guys who are playing huge roles on this team. And so I don't think this trade probably changes much for them this season. They're still bad, although they're still a little better than they want to be. That was the last video that I made on the Raptors sometime last month, was basically saying with guys healthy, this team is probably a little better than they really want to be in terms of getting a high-level draft pick for this upcoming draft, which is loaded. That's kind of becoming more and more of a unlikely outcome, I guess, at this point. Now, the lottery odds could always fall in their favor, but if I had to guess, they're probably not going to end up in some really, really good draft spot, and that's okay. But I do think long-term, Brandon Ingram is actually a pretty decent add to this team. I think he's a little bit underappreciated, and I think this is a team where his scoring punch could be a real asset. Like this Raptors team, at the end of the day, you look at the roster, there's some real talent, and I think there's a sense of direction with this team as well. I like Ochai Agbaji. I think he's had a solid year. Scotty Barnes, really, really solid player who's obviously super effective across the board. RJ Barrett has had a great year, really, I think, bouncing back from some of the reputation that he had built up in New York. Look, a lot of these guys are not really likely long-term contributors, and that's okay, but Grady Dick's had a solid year. I think, again, Ingram is a legit add. Jonathan Mogbo has been impressive as a rookie compared to what was expected. Pirtle is a legit double-double threat every single night at the center position. Super solid player. Emmanuel quickly feels like he has a lot of upside still as a player. They just traded Davion Mitchell as well, which is a trade that I'm not going to dedicate a whole video to, but while I liked Davion Mitchell, I think they did that because they like Jamal Shedd, and they think he can be a real contributor as a bench guard as well. So this opens up a role for him. And look, this is not a completed team. This is not a contending team at this point, but this is a decently competitive team. Like, I have to give them credit. They've been playing pretty good basketball as of late. And I mean, they're 16-35, which obviously isn't probably where they want to be when it comes to the standings. Like, that's a little bit better at this point than they probably want to be. They're not making the play-in, even in a bad Eastern Conference. They're 5.5 games back. They're not making the play-in. They've lost 2 games in a row, but they've still won 6 out of their last 10. And when you look at the league-wide standings, look, they're bad, but they're not quite as bad as I think, in all honesty, they'd probably ideally like to be, which they're the 5th worst team in the league, but they're going to wind up 6th worst behind Brooklyn for sure. And there are a couple other teams here, Atlanta, Portland, if they cool down, Chicago, some teams like that over this second half of the season, I mean, they got 31 more games to play, the Raptors do, and with a team that's been pretty competitive recently, this is a situation where they could easily wind up with the 8th or 9th worst record in the league and wind up with the 8th, 9th, 10th pick in the draft. And obviously that's not ideal. Now, this is not a bad team, or this is not a bad future, I think, for this team, but it would be in their favor to remain in that 5th or 6th worst record. I don't think bottom 5 is realistic because Brooklyn is really bad, but outside of the bottom 5, I do think that they could easily still wind up as the 6th worst record in the league, and that'd probably be the spot you want to be, because that gives you a pretty good shot still at getting a top 4 pick and getting an opportunity to draft a franchise-altering guy. But again, I actually like this core, and I think Brandon Ingram's a guy who can be a real contributor. I mean, you look at what they've been able to do this season. RJ Barrett's a legit 21 point per game guy. He's averaging 6.5 rebounds and almost 6 assists a game as well. Scotty Barnes is a 28-6 guy. That's impressive. I don't think he's a number 1 option on a contending team, I don't think he ever was going to be either. I mean, look, I like Scottie Barnes as a player a lot. I don't think that was in the cards for him as a player. Emmanuel Quickley is a 15.5.7 assist a game guy, and he's only averaging 1.4 turnovers a game as well this season. He's playing like a legitimately high-level point guard. And look, some of the efficiency stuff could be a little better. RJ Barrett's a 35% three-point shooter. Scottie Barnes might never turn into a good three-point shooter. He's 26.5%. Grady Dick, with all the, I think, shooting talent in the world, is still less than 35%. IQ's almost 37, which is pretty good. Baji's a 41% three-point shooter. He's a real contributor. He's athletic as well. I really do like him as an option for this team as well. But guys like Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk, who are real contributors for this team, I think not being on the roster anymore does not hurt them this year. I will say that, especially since BI probably is not a guy who's likely to come in and be a huge impact player. But the thought process for this team is long-term. Brandon Ingram comes in next year, and with an Eastern Conference that is still likely to probably only have 6-7 legitimately good teams, and I'm sure one, or maybe there'll be 8 or 9 going into the season that are expected to be competitive. But one or two of those teams is going to get hurt. One or two of those teams is going to have something bad happen. They probably want to be a playoff team next season. I think that's probably the mindset, is to try to start building something towards the future in Toronto between Emmanuel Quickley, Scottie Barnes, Brandon Ingram, who's still relatively young, and some of these other guys in their core. They want to start building towards being a playoff contending team on a consistent basis. And while I don't think Brandon Ingram's a huge needle mover in terms of trying to become a contender, that's not the path that the Raptors really are on right now. And I don't think for the time being that's the likely outcome. And I do think sometimes there is so much emphasis put on, if you're not a contender to win a title, there's no point in trying to win games. That, despite my own takes, where it's better to be bad than to be bad right in the middle. I think it's better to be above the middle than it is to be in the middle or to be bad either. Because winning basketball games is fun. It's good for your fans. It's good for your team. Being a consistent playoff team is not a bad thing. And this is a Raptors team that, if Scottie Barnes takes that next jump in his development as a more efficient scorer, if Emmanuel Quickley shows the flashes of the things he was doing last season, having missed a lot of the season this year for injury, and becomes a 20-point per game guy and continues to be efficient, if some of these things happen, and if they hit on a draft pick and add another impact guy to this rotation, this could quickly become a team that all of a sudden, oh my goodness, we look up and the Raptors are the 4 seed halfway through the season. That's not impossible. This is a team that could easily find themselves building into a far more competitive team than they look right now. And I think Brandon Ingram is the type of guy who, in a spot where they're going to be able to use his scoring and his ability to be a scorer with the ball in his hands, I like the fit. And I don't hate the trade. I don't think they gave up a lot. I don't think the picks they gave up were significant picks. The players they gave up were not significant long-term impact players. So overall, I like it. I think it's a pretty good trade, and I think it works out pretty good for the Raptors. Now, for the Pelicans, look, Brandon Ingram wasn't going to re-sign anyway. And I assume, here's the other thing. Brandon Ingram obviously is a free agent this summer. I would assume this is he signs and agrees to re-sign with the Raptors. Like, I would think this is a long-term signing, otherwise giving up a first-round pick for him, I don't love it. So the assumption is that he would re-sign. But I don't think the Raptors are going to have huge competition to re-sign him anyway, and I don't think he's going to be a max contract guy anymore either way. So I do think there is a real path to Brandon Ingram getting signed on a relatively decent value contract, not probably anything more than about $30 million a year. And hey, this team could be pretty good next year. I like the addition. I don't think they gave up that much for him. As long as they re-sign him to a decent contract, this is a pretty good move, honestly, for all parties involved, because New Orleans wasn't going to re-sign him anyway. They got back a couple picks. Could be worse. I hope y'all did enjoy the video, though. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. I'll be back with more NBA content very, very soon, and I appreciate y'all. Peace.